Man, we even had a test grade.
Hmm?
We even had a test grade. I didn't wipe off this table, man.
No, I don't think I graded yours yet. Oh yeah, I did.
Yeah, I already graded it.
You want to see?
No, not really.
That's not too bad.
That ain't bad. I hate them, that lecture. What the one we just did last week?
Didn't enjoy that.
They have some. That's why I wish we could just go back to what you call it. The moving and stuff. I meant that moving stuff, but like the questions and the short answer. I really do that.
So go ahead and start. Just going to look at the schedule first. See where we're supposed to be. So this is the 23rd. So we're supposed to do chapter 19, the chapter on the heart. So the second of our 3 chapters on the cardiovascular system. And you have a lab activity due Thursday, hematology. Anybody done that one? I haven't done it either. I should have done it, but I haven't done it yet. Just let me know if you have any trouble with it, and I'll try to help or give more time if necessary. Yeah. trying to record this because one student is out and might have COVID. Okay, the heart doesn't really look much like a Valentine heart like this. It looks more like this, so a little more complicated. First thing we need to learn is that the circulatory system is really like two separate loops or two separate circulatory systems. One is called the pulmonary circuit, and this is it just takes blood from the heart to the left and right lungs and then back to the heart. The word pulmonary means lungs, right? So that's called the pulmonary circuit. And the reason for that is just to get oxygen into the blood. And then when that blood comes back to the heart, then the systemic circuit just pumps it everywhere else, the whole body, all the tissues, the cells, organs. Every cell in your body needs oxygen. And so the blood goes to the lungs and back to the heart and everywhere else. And in that systemic circuit, that's where the oxygen leaves the blood and goes into the tissues to be used by the cells. Now that blood doesn't have oxygen in it anymore, so it has to go back to the heart, go to the lungs, get more oxygen again, come back to the heart, and pump everywhere else again. So it just keeps repeating that cycle. And the heart is actually like two pumps, a left pump and a right pump, with a wall down the middle. This wall here, separating the right side from the left side. That wall is called a septum. And so there's like two separate pumps, a left one and a right one. And while the right pump is pumping blood to the lungs, the left pump is pumping blood everywhere else. This diagram here represents the whole cardiovascular system. So here's the heart, here's the two lungs, left and right lungs. And on these diagrams, I think I mentioned last week that the blood and blood vessels are shown as red in some places and blue in other places. The red means that blood has oxygen in it. The blue means that it does not have oxygen in it. So here we see the blood in the right side of the heart being pumped to the lungs. It's going to the lungs to get oxygen because it doesn't have oxygen in it. So it appears blue. Then while it's in the lungs, it turns from blue to red. That means it's that the red blood cells in that blood are loading up with oxygen from the air that we inhale. Now that blood has oxygen in it, it goes back to the heart, but goes into the left side of the heart. And then the left side pumps the blood out through this big artery, and which goes, this is the systemic circuit of the lower body, and this goes to the upper body, the head and arms. But then when the oxygen leaves this blood, goes into all the tissues, then it's on its way back to the heart to start the whole cycle over again. else was I going to say? We'll do a whole chapter on blood vessels, chapter 20, but for now you should know that a difference between arteries and veins. Veins are blood vessels that take blood away from the heart. And veins are arteries, or veins are blood vessels that take blood back to the heart. So this blood that's leaving the heart, being pumped, going into the systemic tissue, this would be in arteries here, and then these would be veins going back to the heart. Almost all arteries in the body have oxygenated blood in them, blood with a lot of oxygen, and almost all of the veins have blood that is deoxygenated. So the blood does not have much oxygen, except for the pulmonary. So these are pulmonary arteries taking blood to the left and right lungs, and then the pulmonary veins take the blood back to the heart. So the pulmonary arteries and veins are different from all the other arteries and veins in that the pulmonary arteries are low in oxygen, and the pulmonary veins are high in oxygen. Okay, the heart is just a hollow muscle, a big pump. It's actually a left and right pump with a wall down the middle. The heart muscle is called myocardium. Myo means muscle, cardium means heart. Average human heart is about the size of your fist, or maybe like two hands clasped together like this. It just depends on the size of your hands, and some people's hearts are bigger than others. The heart is in the middle of the chest, between the lungs, that area called the mediastinum. And it's not right in the center, it's a little bit to the left of the center. So here, this diagram shows the heart here, the lungs on either side. These are big blood vessels here coming out the top of the heart. We'll learn what they are later. Okay, this would be a transverse section through somebody's chest, right at the level of the heart. So here would be so this is up as front and down as back. So this would be the left lung, right lung. Would be a vertebra, the sternum, breastbone, and then here's be the heart. So here's one of the valves of the heart. We'll learn about the valves of the heart tonight. Here's a diagram of the heart, one of many heart diagrams in this PowerPoint. But this one is looking at the front of the heart. So this is the heart facing us, and we're looking at the outside of the heart. This is the largest artery in the body right here, called the aorta. Comes out the top of the heart. And this goes to the systemic circuit. So there are branches off of the aorta going up to the brain and the shoulders and into the arms. But the aorta also, it arches, curves back behind the heart, and it comes back behind the heart and all the way down through the abdomen, all the way down. It's called the abdominal aorta in this section. And then it branches left and right and becomes some other arteries in the legs. And this big artery, it's called the pulmonary trunk, but it's just an artery, and then it splits, it branches left and right, and becomes the pulmonary arteries that go to the lungs. And that blood gets oxygen. Now that blood comes back to the heart through these pulmonary veins, and there's two of them, two left and two right veins that go back to the heart. And this vein and this vein, called the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, these are the largest veins in the body. And this is all the blood from the systemic circuit coming back to the heart through these big veins. Also, we can see on this view these arteries and veins on the surface of the heart. These are some of the coronary arteries, the red ones, and the coronary arteries provide blood for the heart muscle itself. This is just a thick wall of muscle on the heart, and even though the heart is full of blood all the time, there's blood flowing through it and it's pumping blood, that's not enough blood for this thick muscle. It has to have its own blood vessels that go deep into that muscle and deliver oxygen and nutrients to all the cardiac muscle cells of this myocardium, the heart muscle. And those blood vessels that do that are the coronary arteries. These are the ones that if they get clogged, they cause a heart attack. Because, for example, if this coronary artery would get clogged right here, so blood can't get down into all this muscle, that muscle is going to die. That's what a heart attack is. Part of the heart muscle is starved of blood. It's not getting oxygen and nutrients, so it just dies. And, if that person survives that heart attack, now this is scar tissue. It's not functioning cardiac muscle cells anymore. It won't contract anymore. It's just scar tissue, and that heart will never be the same. It won't work as well. These arteries can get clogged, just like any arteries get clogged with plaque that builds up inside of them from cholesterol and saturated fats and unhealthy diet. And it's partially genetic. Some people are just more prone to get that plaque in their arteries. It can be repaired surgically, but those arteries can be replaced. That's the bypass operation that lots of people have done. Now they have a procedure called balloon angioplasty, where they actually put a long, slender balloon into the artery and inflate it, and it enlarges the blood vessel to restore the blood flow through it. Okay, here's looking at the back of the heart. You see more coronary arteries. And, these blue ones are called cardiac veins, and that's just taking the same blood that was in the coronary arteries. It's coming back out, and it'll go back into the heart to be pumped again. This coronary sinus is just where all those cardiac veins come together, so all that blood that would flow through the heart muscle is now on its way back into the heart to be pumped again. Here we see where the two pulmonary veins on the left and right come back into the heart. Here's that pulmonary arteries, and here's where the aorta, that great big artery for the systemic circuit, comes out the top of the heart, and then it would curve down and come all the way down here, but it's cut away in that view. Here's where these big veins, the inferior vena cava and superior vena cava, take blood back into the heart. Remember we learned a long time ago about the pericardium, the two layers of membrane that surround the heart. The outer one's called the parietal pericardium, and the inner one is called the visceral pericardium. And there's a thin layer of slimy liquid in between called serous fluid. And that's where the pericardial cavity is. This word epicardium is just another name for the visceral pericardium. And so if we look at, well, we look at this diagram. So look at the wall of the heart. This hollow part in here is where the blood would be. But so this thick part would be the muscle, and then so enlarged here. This is the muscle, the myocardium, and then this would be the visceral pericardium, which is also called the epicardium. So that's attached to the surface of the heart. And then here's the parietal pericardium, the other layer of membrane, and in between is this thin layer of serous fluid, and that's the pericardial cavity. The heart, the hollow part of the heart inside it has a lining called the endocardium. So this is the endocardium here, lining this inside part. So this would be the endocardium. So there's three layers: the endocardium on the inside, and then the myocardium, and then the epicardium, which is the same as the visceral peritoneum or pericardium. And then there's the parietal pericardium to the outside of that. Okay, more about the anatomy of the heart. Let's look at this diagram. So this word septum, the word septum just means wall in anatomy. Like we have a nasal septum dividing the left and right nasal cavity. But this is the interventricular septum. Inter means between. These lower chambers called the ventricles. So it's between the ventricles, this wall, separating the right and left sides of the heart. And these the atrium and ventricle. There's a human heart has 4 chambers. The chambers are just the hollow parts, the hollow sections of the heart. All mammals and birds have four-chambered hearts. And the upper chambers are called the atrium, or atria is plural. And the lower ones are called the ventricles. And so on this diagram, these are the atria. This is the right atrium, and this is the left atrium, because this heart is facing us. So these are the upper chambers, the left and right atrium. And then down here, this down here is the right ventricle, and then this is the left ventricle down here. There are 4 valves in a human heart. You need to know the names of them and what they're for. But the valves in the heart are just to keep the blood going in the correct direction and making sure it doesn't flow backwards in the heart. And those valves open and close. So they're one-way valves. The blood should go through in only one direction, not the other. And so here's the valves. They're these white or light-colored objects. So these weird-looking valves are called atrioventricular valves, because each one is between an atrium above the valve and a ventricle below the valve. So atrioventricular valves. So there's a right atrioventricular valve and a left atrioventricular valve. And the right one is called the tricuspid. So the right atrioventricular valve is the tricuspid valve. The left atrioventricular valve is the bicuspid, also called the mitral valve. Um, uh, there are these names, tricuspid and bicuspid. We'll see a different view that later that shows us that the right valve has three flaps that open and close, and the bicuspid has only two flaps. So tri means three, bi means two. So the cusps are the flaps of the valve. So those are the atrioventricular valve. There's also, well, another thing about these is these valves, the flaps of these valves have these are little tendons that attach to these muscles in the bottom of the ventricle here. The muscles are called papillary muscles, and the tendons are called chordae tendineae. So these muscles contract and relax, and that's what makes the flaps of these valves move up and down to open and close the valve. And so the blood comes into the heart, enters the heart in the atria, left and right atrium, with these valves closed. And then after these fill up, then these valves open, these atria contract, and it pumps the blood, just squeezes the blood down into the left and right ventricles. Then these valves close again, and then the ventricles both contract, and it pumps the blood out through the top of the heart through these arteries. The blood from the right side of the heart goes out these pulmonary arteries to the lungs. The blood from the left side of the heart goes out through the aorta to the systemic circuit. Now, after the ventricles have contracted and pumped the blood out, then, as the blood is being pumped out, it pushes these valves open. These valves don't have muscles on them to open and close them. It's just the flow of the blood pushes them open. And then when the ventricle stops contracting, now these arteries are full of blood. These arteries are very stretchy, like balloons. They stretch out. And now that stretchy arteries is squeezing on that blood, trying to push it back in. But these valves just close. The pressure of the blood makes these valve flaps just close, and so the blood can't go back into the heart. These valves are called semilunar valves. Semilunar means half moon. Somebody, I guess, thought that the flaps of those valves look like half moons or something, so they call them semilunar valves. And the right one is called the pulmonary valve because it's the one that keeps the blood from coming back out of the pulmonary artery. So this is blood on its way to the lungs, so that's called the pulmonary valve. This one is called the aortic valve. So if blood goes through it on its way out through the aorta, and it prevents the blood from coming back in. Some people have leaky heart valves. So they're supposed to close tight so the blood can't flow backwards. But a lot of people have valves that leak, and so their heart always has to be working extra hard to pump enough blood out of the heart because some of it is flowing back in. There are valves can be surgically replaced. There are artificial valves, and pig valves from pig hearts have been used for a long time to replace defective heart valves in people. My dad had a bad aortic valve. He was born with a genetic, and aortic valve is supposed to have 3 flaps. This had 2. It only had 2 flaps. And he didn't even know it until he was in his 50s. He'd always been healthy and athletic, and until he was in his 50s, started having some trouble, and he found out he had defective aortic valve, and that happens a lot in people with bad heart valves. They don't know it until they get older, and because in his case, the valve sealed just fine. It worked like the valves are supposed to, open and close. But the fact that the flaps of the valve were abnormal shaped meant that when the blood flowed through those valves, it didn't flow through smoothly. And that's important because if the blood is turbulent, or if it churns as it goes through the valves instead of flowing through nice and smooth, that over many years, that causes minerals in the blood to start to deposit on the valve. And now, so there's got to be a hard crust on those valves. Now they don't open and close normally, and so they start to leak. And, so he had surgery to replace his heart valve with a pig valve, and he didn't survive. He died. That's 30 years ago. Okay, what else? So this, so the blood comes in to the atria, left and right atria, goes through these valves into the ventricles, and then it gets pumped out through these arteries. This short section of artery here is called the pulmonary trunk, and it's so the blood on its way to the lungs comes out here, and then it just divides or branches into left and right pulmonary arteries, which go to the lungs. And here again, the left and right pulmonary veins taking blood back from the lungs. That blood comes back from the lungs into the left side, the left atrium. So this fills up with blood from the lungs. So this blood is loaded with oxygen now. It just came from the lungs. Then it goes into the ventricle, the left ventricle. Then it gets pumped out through this big aorta, goes through the whole systemic circuit. Takes blood to the brain, the arms, legs, all the internal organs. And then that blood comes back through these inferior and superior vena cava back into the right atrium, which then goes to the lungs again to start over and repeat the whole thing. But both left and right atria contract at the same moment, and then a moment later both ventricles contract. So it's like the left and right side of the heart are both pumping at the same time. Every time your heart beats, both sides pump blood out. The myocardium, the muscle in the left side of the heart, is thicker here. You can see thicker than the right side, because this side, when it contracts, it's only pumping blood into the lungs and back. But this side has to pump blood everywhere through the whole systemic circuit. So this has to be able to produce a lot more pressure to pump that blood out through the whole body. Every time the heart contracts and pumps blood out, these stretchy arteries, they balloon out, and that's what we feel as a pulse. The carotid artery, the brachial artery, the radial artery. That's just those arteries stretching out every time the heart beats. Here's this is a photograph of somebody's heart. I think he's dead. His heart's been cut open. Um, um, or maybe he got a new heart transplant. This is the old one. I hope this new one looks better. But so again, it's uh, hard to see what you're looking at here, but the atrium would be up here somewhere, the ventricle here. There's the right ventricle, and I guess the right atrium. This word auricle, the auricle is just part of the atrium that's just kind of a flap. A flap kind of sticking out, and you can see it on the outside of the heart. We have a bunch of sheep hearts over here in buckets that normally, if we could do hands-on lab, we would be cutting those hearts open and looking at them. Maybe I'll get one out next week before class, and we can look at it. Okay, I already talked about all this, the left and right atrium, left and right ventricle. The heart has a lot of dense connective tissue in it, in addition to the muscle, the cardiac muscle tissue. And this is called the fibrous skeleton. It just strengthens the structure of the heart. Okay, here's a view of the heart. This would be a transverse section through the heart looking down. And so here we see all four valves. So the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve. So here's the three flaps. And these are called semilunar valves. Somebody, I guess, thought these looked like half moons or something, so it's called a semilunar valve. As I said, my dad had a bad aortic valve. His had just two flaps instead of three. And these are the atrioventricular valves. So this would be the left one, the bicuspid valve. Just two flaps, two cusps. And this was also called the mitral valve. And this is the right one, the tricuspid. So 1, 2, 3 cusps or flaps. How I remember which is which is that the word tricuspid has an RI in it as in right. So that's how I remember the tricuspid's the right one, and the bicuspid is the other one, the left one. Something that you can kind of see here. So right above the aortic valve, so this would be the aorta coming out the top of the heart here. And the very first branches off of the aorta are these coronary arteries. So these are the blood's being pumped out of the left ventricle into the aorta, and some of that blood goes right back to the heart muscle through those coronary arteries to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the heart muscle itself. Okay, I already described all this about the valves and the muscles that open and close the atrioventricular valves. It's another diagram showing the same thing. Left atrium. Here's the bicuspid valve with the tendons and muscles, and then same thing on the right side. The right ventricle or right atrium, and then the valve, and then the ventricle down here. And the pulmonary valve, the aortic valve, So this blood coming up here through the aortic valve, it's not shown here, but right down here at the bottom of the aorta, there's branches that go right down to the heart muscle, so to those coronary arteries to deliver blood to the heart muscle itself. Yeah. Another diagram, just same thing here. This on this one, you can't see the pulmonary valve. It's been cut away, but it would be down here at the bottom of this pulmonary trunk somewhere. But we can see the aortic valve better because this has been cut away. So you see how the blood goes from the left ventricle out through the aortic valve and into the aorta. And here's another diagram showing the valves. This one's kind of upside down compared to the one we saw before. This one has anterior at the bottom and posterior at the top. And here we see what it would look like when the blood is the blood is moving from the left and right atrium into the ventricles, because these atrioventricular valves are open now, but the semilunar valves are both closed as the ventricles are filling up with blood. And then a moment later, now the ventricles are contracting, pumping the blood out through the aorta and pulmonary valves. So these valves are open now, and these valves are closed so that the blood doesn't go backwards up into the left and right atrium. And here's an actual heart that's been cut apart to show the valves. Okay, I've already talked about this. The main function of these valves is just to keep the blood going in the correct direction so it doesn't go backwards. Again, same thing. Valves, 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 valves. Now this slide here is important. You need to study this because this is just a summary that I put together of the path of blood through the whole body. So just imagine that you are a red blood cell starting out in the right side of the heart. This would be the path that you would take through the whole body. I must be tired. I keep having thoughts and then they disappear before I say them. I forget what I'm. I was going to say that just remember. I always remember right to the lungs. Just remember right to the lungs, because the right side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs, and then the left side pumps it everywhere else. Just remember right to the lungs. And when I'm remembering this, tracing the path of blood through the body, I always start on the right side because I remember it goes to the lungs first. So this starts in the right atrium. So blood's coming in through those big veins, the inferior and superior vena cava. That blood has been through the systemic circuit, so it doesn't have much oxygen left. So the left and right, or the right atrium fills up, then it contracts, pushing the blood into the right ventricle. Then the right ventricle contracts, pushes the blood out through the pulmonary valve and pulmonary trunk, to the left and right pulmonary arteries, to the lungs where they get oxygen. As oxygen is entering the blood in the lungs, carbon dioxide in the blood is leaving the blood, going into the air in the lungs, and then we exhale that to get rid of carbon dioxide. Now this blood that has loaded up with oxygen in the lungs goes back to the heart, but it started out in the right atrium, now it's going to the left side, the left atrium. Through the pulmonary veins, left and right. And then blood goes from the left atrium into the left ventricle. Then the left ventricle contracts, pumps that blood out through the aorta, and then it goes throughout the systemic circuit. And also some of it goes to the coronary arteries of the heart muscle itself. And then that blood that has been through the systemic circuit goes back to the right atrium. It starts over. And this is described starting in the right atrium and following, following one red blood cell through the whole system. But just realize that as the right atrium is filling up with blood, so is the left atrium. So it's the same. So both sides of the heart are filling up with blood and pumping blood out at the same time. Both atria contract, and then a moment later, both ventricles contract, and then a moment later, it'll repeat, another heartbeat. Okay, another nice diagram summarizing this. Got nice arrows showing the path, the direction of the blood coming in through the inferior vena cava into the atrium and the ventricle, then out to the lungs. Gets oxygen, comes back through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium, left ventricle, and out through the aorta to the systemic circuit. A lot of other stuff's going on. This blood is being filtered by the kidneys to take out anything we have too much of in the blood and put it into urine. The digestive system is absorbing nutrients into the blood that will also be distributed to all the tissues of the body that need nutrients for energy. Okay, more pictures showing the same thing, just in a little different way. Okay, the heart sound, the sounds that the heart makes. The word auscultation just means listening to something, some body sound, usually referring to the heartbeats with a stethoscope, but also could be listening to the lungs as the patient inhales and exhales, using the stethoscope along with a blood pressure cuff to measure blood pressure. So what are we actually hearing? Those lubbed up sounds of the heartbeat. That's actually those valves closing. So the first sound we hear is the atrioventricular valves closing after the blood has gone from the atria to the ventricles. And then after the ventricles contract, pump the blood out into the arteries, then the semilunar valves close to prevent it coming back into the heart. So that's what they're lubbed up. Those are valves closing. And a heart murmur is just any abnormal heartbeat sounds. Often, in people who have leaky heart valves, you don't hear necessarily just a sharp lubbed up sound. You'll hear some hissing or squishing sound along with it. That's the blood leaking back through the valves when they're supposed to be closed tight. Okay, I already talked about the coronary arteries here. You can see some of them on the surface of the heart, but That's what delivers blood to the myocardium itself. And then the cardiac veins take that blood uh, that has been through the myocardium it all collects in the coronary sinus. It's just a vein that takes the blood back into the right atrium to be pumped again. Okay, just more pictures of coronary arteries and cardiac veins. So here we see the aorta and a branch off of the aorta. That's blood branches off the aorta taking blood to the heart muscle itself. And then here we see blood that has been through the heart muscle. It's going, yes, what I'm looking at. It goes back, it'll go into the right atrium. Just, I don't know. Okay, what makes the heart beat? What stimulates the cardiac muscle to contract every second or so is called the cardiac conduction system. So that's the built-in pacemaker in your heart, the natural pacemaker. We've all seen on TV shows where a heart surgeon takes a heart out of a living patient to do a transplant or something, and completely removes it out of the patient, and it's still beating by itself. It's not connected to a person anymore, and it just continues to beat because it has its own built-in pacemaker that's part of the heart, and that includes these parts that the main pacemaker that initiates or begins every heartbeat is called the sinoatrial node. And well, let's just better look at a diagram here. Yeah, here. So it's called the sinoatrial node because it's in the back of the right atrium here, and the on the EKG, that readout, it's wave that records the electrical activity of the heart. It's called a sine wave, and so that's why it's called a sinoatrial node. So these arrows represent this. It's much like an electrical impulse, like action potentials being sent out that conducts along all those cardiac muscle fibers, cardiac muscle cells of the left and right atrium. And remember we learned that cardiac muscles tissue has intercalated discs. Those are actually, they look like dark lines on the through a microscope where the two cardiac muscle fibers meet end to end, but that's actually a synapse, a connection there that allows that impulse as it's traveling through one cardiac muscle fiber. When it gets to the intercalated disc, it just continues on right to the next muscle fiber. It doesn't slow down at all. Those intercalated discs, they not only connect the muscle fibers together, but they provide a transmission of that electrical impulse from one to the next. And so when that impulse begins here, it spreads out just lightning fast over all those cardiac muscle fibers in both left and right atrium. So they both contract at the same moment to pump the blood. And when that impulse reaches this, it's like a second pacemaker called the atrioventricular node, then it sends out impulses for the ventricles, causes the ventricles to contract. But because the ventricles are they're so much bigger, thicker muscle, there's way more muscle tissue here than in the atrium. They have, there are these nerves that conduct action potentials, nerve impulses throughout all that thick muscle tissue of the ventricles. And those nerves are called atrioventricular AV bundles and Purkinje fibers. And there was another name. AV bundles, bundle branches, and Purkinje fibers. So those are just nerves that carry that pacemaker impulse throughout the muscle tissue of the ventricles to stimulate them to contract, to pump the blood out of the ventricles. Okay, so this is some people have irregular heartbeats, or the pacemaker doesn't work right, so they can get an artificial one implanted that will just regular every second or so send out an impulse to stimulate their heart to beat. So the pacemaker keeps the heart beating every second or so, but the heartbeat can be influenced by nervous control, nervous system. So even though the heart has its own pacemaker, the nervous system can speed up the heart rate. And we have a part of the brainstem called the cardiovascular center, or CV center, and that's the part of the brain that controls the heart rate by sending out nerve impulses to the heart sometimes to speed it up. Like when you're in fight or flight mode, or if your blood pressure starts to drop, your brainstem, your CV center will send nerve impulses to the heart to speed it up, to try to bring the blood pressure back up. Also, we know that hormones can influence heart rate. Of course, the fight or flight hormones will speed up the heart rate. Thyroid hormones generally increase rate of metabolism, so that would affect heart rate. And even certain ions in the blood, sodium and potassium and calcium, can influence the heart rate. Newborn babies and little kids have a faster heart rate than adults on average. So average adult is 75 beats per minute. Kids can be up to 120 or even higher than that. Physical fitness can affect heart rate, especially endurance athletes, people who run marathons or do a lot of swimming or long distance bicycling a lot. Their resting heart rate will decrease, and I've had this myself. I've been a long distance runner since high school, still am, and there have been times when I've been training for a marathon and I'm in really good shape, and I one of the ways I measure my fitness is I'll check my resting pulse rate. The lower it is, the better shape I'm in, and for that kind of activity. And my heart rate, a few times, there have been a few times in my life when I measured my heart rate first thing in the morning before drinking any coffee or anything, and it's been as low as 38 resting. And I was just yesterday, I was at the dentist, and they were giving me some local anesthetic. So the hygienist measured my blood pressure and my heart rate, and I'm not even certainly not in peak condition right now, but my heart rate was 50, and I'm 65 years old, so that's considerably less than average. And the reason for that is if you do a lot of that aerobic activity, that aerobic exercise, your heart just gets stronger, so that with every heartbeat it pumps out more blood, and so you don't need as many heartbeats per minute to get the blood throughout the body. Should introduce this word that we don't use so much in, I don't know, in medicine and nursing. I know if you're in nursing, they'll use this word perfusion. In nursing, when they talk about perfusion, they're talking about blood getting into the tissues, the tissues being perfused with blood. Okay, this is just showing the heart with its own pacemaker, the SA node, sinoatrial node, but also it can be affected by the nervous system. So we have these in the aorta and in the carotid arteries on the neck. We have sensory receptors called baroreceptors that measure the blood pressure. Baro means pressure, as in barometer, measures atmospheric pressure. And so these measure your blood pressure. They're always sending information to the cardiovascular center in the brainstem, and so if the blood pressure starts to drop, then the cardiovascular center might send nerve impulses to the heart because it will speed up to bring the blood pressure back up. Electrocardiogram, ECG or EKG. This is where they put the electrodes on the patient's chest and then measure the electrical activity of the heart. It will be recorded or displayed on a monitor as this kind of waves pattern, and the shape of the waves indicates, I guess, whether the patient's heartbeat is normal or the electrical activity is normal. And a cardiologist can look at that, and I can't read that, but they can tell if that's normal or not. And different parts of the wave have names: the P wave and the Q and the R and the S. I'm not sure what's happening in the heart at each of those times, but cardiologists know what that means. Okay, we don't need to know all that. Okay, the cardiac cycle. It's just what happens in each heartbeat. It's called the cardiac cycle. And these words, systole and diastole, you need to know those words. And if you know about blood pressure, you know that there's two numbers in the blood pressure reading. The first one, the big number, is the systolic, and then the lower one is the diastolic pressure. And those words, systolic and diastolic, come from these words, systole and diastole. So systole is just when a heart chamber is contracting. So when the atria are contracting, it's called atrial systole, and then a moment later will be ventricular systole when the ventricles contract. And diastole is the brief period of relaxation in between contracting chambers. So the blood pressure is the blood pressure is highest when the ventricles are contracting, so that's when the blood is being pumped out into the arteries. And so that's what the systolic blood pressure is. Diastolic blood pressure is when the heart is not contracting, and that blood pressure drops. So it doesn't go to zero because the arteries that the blood has been pumped into are very stretchy. And so the stretchy arteries are squeezing on that blood that has just been pumped into them. At a heart rate of 75 per minute, that's 0.8 of a second per heartbeat. So if you divide 60 seconds by 75 heartbeats per minute, then you get 0.8 seconds per heartbeat. Okay. This is just explaining what we've already described. When the heart muscle contracts and squeezes on the blood in the heart, it increases the pressure in that blood, and that causes the blood to move out of that chamber. It's pretty obvious. Right? Okay, same thing. Just explaining how the chambers contract and push the blood out. And this is just summarizing all the stuff that happens in each cardiac cycle. So electrical events, that's what the pacemaker does, sends out those impulses or like action potentials that spread out, that conduct along the cardiac muscle fibers, causing them to contract. Pressure changes, of course, as the chambers contract, it increases the pressure on the blood in those chambers. The heart sounds we talked about, the valves closing, volume changes. The volume is just the space contained by the chambers, and so of course when they contract, that space gets smaller and pushes the blood out. And then it's just in general the mechanical events or the physical changes that occur, the contracting of the chambers, moving the blood through the heart and out of the heart. And this is just showing again the EKG waves at different times in the heartbeat. Pressure changes in the different chambers throughout the heartbeat. Heart sounds. So the atrioventricular valves close between atrial systole and ventricular systole, and then after ventricular systole, the semilunar valves close and make a sound again. Volume changes as the heart chambers contract. And then the mechanical events, just showing the arrows of the blood moving through. And this is summarizing all of that stuff together. Okay, couple of more terms here. Of course, the heart rate is just the number of beats per minute, average 75. Stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped out in one heartbeat. So that's average 70 milliliters per heartbeat. So about 7/10 of a liter per heartbeat. And the cardiac output is the amount ejected by left ventricle each minute. So if you multiply the stroke volume times the number of heartbeats per minute, you get the cardiac output. So if it's 70 milliliters of blood for one heartbeat, and there's 75 heartbeats per minute, then be this much blood per minute. About 5 1/4 liters of blood is pumped out of the heart per minute. Okay, just some listing of factors that can affect the heart rate and the amount of blood pumped out of the heart. And again, the heart rate is affected by nervous system. And like all muscle, whether it's cardiac, smooth, or skeletal muscle, they use a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy to contract muscles. And so cells store energy in ATP molecules. Remember, those are little rechargeable battery molecules, I call them, that cells store energy. And so cells are always breaking down nutrients like sugar molecules to release the energy that was holding those nutrient molecules together. That's called aerobic cellular respiration. Those chemical reactions for breaking down nutrient molecules. And those reactions require oxygen. That's why it's called aerobic cellular respiration. And that energy that's released by those sugar molecules or whatever, sugars, fats, that is temporarily stored in these little ATP molecules until the cells use them, use the energy. So most of the ATP in muscle cells, like all of our cells, is made by aerobic cellular respiration. But our muscle cells can also make some ATP. Well, for one thing, our muscle tissue stores has this myoglobin, which is similar to hemoglobin in our red blood cells. Myoglobin is protein molecules in our muscle tissue that has oxygen molecules attached to it. So your muscles use so much oxygen for making ATP for energy all the time that they have their own extra storage of oxygen in them. So in addition to the oxygen that's always being delivered by blood, they have their own special way of storing a little extra oxygen. Muscle tissue can have another way of making ATP that's besides the regular way, breaking down nutrient molecules. They store this other molecule called creatine phosphate. Remember, the P in ATP stands for phosphate. Adenosine triphosphate. There's 3 phosphates on it. So this is like a charged battery. ADP with only 2 phosphates instead of 3 is like a dead battery. So to recharge, you add a phosphate. And same thing, same kind of phosphate. So your muscle cells can take the phosphate off creatine phosphate, put it onto ADP to make ATP. It's just an extra way to make ATP because because muscle fibers use so much ATP, so much energy for contracting all the time. This enzyme that does this is called creatine kinase. Remember, ASE on the end of a word usually means it's an enzyme. This stuff normally stays in muscle cells, muscle fibers, but if it shows up in blood, it could mean that there's been damage to some muscles in the body. It could be just traumatic injury to any muscle would cause creatine kinase to leak out of the muscle tissue into the blood. But if a heart attack is suspected, then we check for creatine kinase in the blood. It might just be more evidence that it's a heart attack, that heart muscle is damaged, and so creatine kinase has gotten into the blood. Okay, it's just more about making ATP. Exercise and the heart. Like I was saying before, aerobic exercise or called cardiorespiratory exercise, it's anything that causes you to breathe heavy, breathe faster, and to make your heart beat faster. And um, um, there's a formula. I have it on a flash drive somewhere. I don't think I have it with me, but um, for calculating what your target heart rate should be for aerobic exercise. So for it to be effective, you have to get your heart rate up to a certain heart rate and keep it there for at least 20 minutes, at least 3 times a week. And that heart rate depends on the target heart rate depends on your age and what your resting heart rate is, and there's a simple formula for figuring it out. So like treadmills and stair steppers have built-in heart rate or pulse rate meters on them. Just by having your hands on the handles, it measures your heart rate, so you can watch that and try to keep it above that, what your target heart rate should be for at least 20 minutes to improve your cardiovascular system. So it could be anything, just brisk walking, running, biking, cross-country skiing, swimming. There was a while when I couldn't run when I was in my 30s. I had knee injury, and for a long time I couldn't run, and I thought I was never going to run again. So I started walking, just doing fast walking, and really got into that, and found that that after an hour of really fast walking, I'd be just as tired and sweaty as if I had run for an hour. Walking can be really good aerobic exercise. Okay, benefits of aerobic exercse. I won't read through all that. Okay, this is a fetus of a heart. And this is kind of interesting. When you were a fetus in your mother's uterus, you weren't breathing air in there. So your lungs weren't functioning. You got oxygen from your mother through the umbilical cord. Right? She would inhale oxygen, get oxygen into her blood, and then in the I can't think of words, but anyway, so the oxygen from her blood would get into the umbilical cord blood and then get into your body, your little fetus body. And so your lungs weren't functioning, and so the right side of your heart, which normally in an adult pumps blood to the lungs, there's no reason to pump blood to the lungs that don't have any oxygen in them. So there was a hole between the right and left atrium that the blood would take a shortcut. Instead of going to the lungs and then back into the left atrium, the blood would just take a shortcut straight from the right atrium into the left atrium, and then be pumped through the systemic circuit. That hole is called a foramen ovale. We learned that word foramen when we studied bones. It just means a hole. Right? And I guess it's an oval-shaped hole, so they call it foramen ovale in Latin. But when you're born, about the time you're born, you take your first breath. Now you're bringing in your own oxygen, and now your pulmonary circuit needs to start functioning. So this hole is supposed to close up around the time of birth. So this will, it's like you'll close, there'll just be a little scar there called the fossa ovalis. It's just a little dished out depression that's still, I guess, visible even in an adult heart. And some people, some babies, it doesn't close normally. It can sometimes take longer, weeks or even months. In some cases, it has to be surgically closed. Okay, and finally, some heart disorders and diseases. Cardiology, of course, is a scientific or medical specialty of the heart and its diseases. Myocardial infarction, MI, that's a term you need to know because that's a heart attack. That's what in medicine they often just use the initials MI for a heart attack. Like I was saying earlier, it's because there's an interruption in blood supply to part of the heart. Usually because coronary arteries are blocked. Arrhythmia, abnormal heartbeat rhythm, due to the defect in the cardiac conduction system, so the pacemaker system is not working right. So if it's bad enough, there could be an artificial pacemaker implanted. A couple other terms, tachycardia and bradycardia, not on here, but maybe they should be tachycardia and bradycardia. Bradycardia. Tachycardia means heartbeats too fast. Bradycardia means heartbeats too slow. I've heard ER doctors, paramedics use the term bradying. The patient's bradying down, which means the heartbeat slowing down and probably going to die if they don't do something. Atherosclerosis, that's a buildup of plaque inside of arteries. And so the hollow opening in the artery just gets smaller and smaller because it's just building up plaque on the inside of the artery. We've all heard of people, say that I had 95% blockage in one or more coronary arteries. That's what they're talking about. The inside of artery is supposed to be, here's the wall of the artery. It's supposed to be this nice big area for blood to flow through, but if this is all, getting plaque built up inside of it over years and years of cheeseburgers and pizza, and so now there's just this little tiny, well, that's not enough to get enough blood to the tissues, and that can happen to any arteries in the body. Can happen to arteries going to the brain. That's no good. Happens to these. I think I've read that's one of the causes of male erectile dysfunction, not getting enough blood to that part of the body. But if it happens to the coronary arteries, it can cause a heart attack. Heart patients, cardiac patients who know they have this, and they have occasional chest pains for that reason. It's not necessarily a heart attack, but they just get angina, heart pains, because of that from time to time, and people like that often carry nitroglycerin pills with them. Why they take nitroglycerin is because nitroglycerin is a very powerful vasodilator. It means it makes blood vessels dilate really, really fast. And if this is what your coronary arteries look like, you want them to get bigger, right, to increase blood flow. And so where it acts really fast. You put one in their mouth, and it works really fast. So if you if someone seems to be having some kind of cardiac episode, collapses, you might check their pockets. They might have nitroglycerin in their pockets, and might save your life by giving you some. Okay, arteriosclerosis, a similar word, but this is different. The word sclerosis just means hardening, something getting harder, hardening. In fact, this used to be called, I don't hear the term anymore, but it used to be called hardening of the arteries, because the arteries themselves are getting hard and they don't stretch anymore like they're supposed to. So the blood's pumping out of the heart into those arteries that are supposed to balloon out. If they don't balloon out, that pressure has nowhere to go, so it causes hypertension. A lot of people with hypertension this is the cause of it. Their arteries just don't stretch out like they're supposed to. This is largely genetic. Not a lot you can do about it. Although I think I've read that selenium supplements might help arteries. Okay, coronary artery disease. This is a general term for. It usually involves atherosclerosis and congestive heart failure. Again, this is not just one thing. It's just generally the heart is just getting weaker. It's not pumping enough blood out to all the tissues. It usually happens to older people. Okay, the rest of this you don't have to know. I just put this in here. Some of it's interesting. This just shows how they do a heart transplant, where they cut the inferior and superior vena cava, and you can see the sutures there, the aorta, the pulmonary trunk, where they suture the new heart to the old blood vessels in the person. They'd have to do the pulmonary veins too, two left and two right. Okay, and then some cardiac assist devices. These balloon pumps, ventricular assist device. This cardiomyoplasty, this is interesting. They take a piece of muscle from another part of the person's body and put it onto the heart to help the heart contract. So they use skeletal muscle on the heart with an implanted pacemaker to stimulate that skeletal muscle to contract 10 to 20 times per minute. Okay. That's all. I'll finish up reading these and get the grades on Moodle tonight.
That made him a good night.
Right, let's see.